And I'd like them to just take 30 seconds and introduce themselves and maybe talk a little bit about the piece that they did, starting with my right, your left, I guess.
My name's Steve Capps, and I worked a little bit on the ROM and helped Bruce Horn.
My name's Andy Kirksfeld, and I worked on a lot of the system software.
I wrote the word processor. My name's Bill Atkinson. I did QuickDraw graphics for primitives.
I'm Bruce Horn, and I worked on the ROM little and on Finder with Steve Capps.
My name is Burl Smith, and I designed the Dickon logic board.
My name's Ronnie Subach, and I wrote the mouse lesson that you get on your MacBook disk and the font.
So if we have some really great questions, we'd like to answer them. But before we do, Bill and Randy are going to run through some really quick demos, which you'll be able to see up on that screen, to give you a little feeling for the kinds of things that we can do.
I'm going to show you the MacPaint graphics editor that runs on Macintosh and lets you edit images. Sometimes conveying your message goes better with pictures than with words. You can erase parts of the image using this little thing that looks like a brick. It's supposed to be an eraser, but that's the best I can do. And if you just scrub with it, it kind of eats away. And after you get bored with scrubbing a lot, you can just click twice and it'll get rid of everything. This tool lets me draw a curved... I'm a little nervous, so I'm not too good with the mouse. Okay. The next tool here is a spray can, and it lets me do smooth shading. I can kind of gradually shade in something, and the longer I spray, the darker it gets. For example, I can even control individual pixels. I can point at a dot and turn it on or off. And you have to kind of squint a bit, or you can go into fat bits, which lets you see a magnified view, and it's easy for me to turn on and off bits. If you hold down the Option key, then as you do so, it leaves behind the old one, so you can peel off a copy easily. Sometimes you want to select a non-rectangular selection, and notice this carries just the ball. I just lasso around the object. When I let go, the lasso tightens around it and gets just that thing. Again, Option will peel off a copy, and in fact, Feature and Option will peel off many copies. Now select that with the lasso and copy that into the clipboard. This lets me take it between different documents. I can now paste that into another MacPaint document, or I'm going to quit MacPaint and we'll even paste this into a word processing document. Randy Wigington is now going to show us the MacWrite word processor.
As incredible as MacPaint is, it's really nothing compared to the QuickDraw routines that... it's nothing compared to the QuickDraw routines that Bill wrote for the ROM, and he also wrote for Lisa. If it weren't for Bill, none of us would be up here on this stage. So I'd like to thank him for that.
I thought we were going to say compared to MacWrite.
No, it's a lot more interesting than a word processor. The whole thrust behind Mac is to make everything easy to use and very visually oriented. As Steve said, we didn't want you to remember a lot of escape/Command-Zs or anything like that. The whole idea is that whatever you see on the screen is what you're going to get on the printed page. For example, to type, all you do is you simply point the mouse somewhere, you click, and you start typing. Additionally, we have a large choice of fonts. All of these fonts come provided with each disc. One of my favorites is London, which is Old English. This is wonderful for writing letters to mom. Sure. Really thinks you're getting a classic education this way. Another font that is one of my favorites is the one called San Francisco. This is used for Apple's new program called Cons Can't Wait. This isn't a very successful con. It has problems. Simply click on the box that you want to format the text according to your desires. We have center justify, right justify, or fill justify, where your margins are fully justified on both sides. We wanted you to see the printer image. If you make a mistake at any time, no matter what you've done, you can always go back to the edit menu and select undo, and it will tell you what you're undoing, and we'll go back to the way it was before. If, for example, you had a lot of this selected, and as happens sometimes your cat jumps on the keyboard and types that, you simply go up and you say undo, and you're back to where you were. We wanted to make it pretty forgiving so that you wouldn't curse at me later. Okay, thank you.
The fire, children, and listen while I tell the tale of how the Macintosh got its name. You see, when Jeff Raskin started his project, he had to give it a name, a secret name, its inner and hidden name, the name by which no one would know outside the company what we were doing. Handy, what could that be? Pippin, what could that be? Red Delicious, what is that? I don't know. Macintosh, I have no idea what Apple is doing. But we knew someday we'd have to choose a real name. Fierce name, a public name, a name which would make us proud. We thought, Apple IV. What? Lisa and Macintosh were running neck and neck, and who would win the race to ship first? We didn't know. Apple V? Apple IV. Or Apple 4000. Ah, that follows the pattern, yet gives it a lot of oomph. But in the end, we just couldn't bear to name it anything else than the name by which we had fallen in love with it, the Macintosh. Problem solved? No. How do you spell Macintosh? M-A-K? I have t-shirts that say M-A-K-Intosh. M-A-C-K? I have a sweatshirt that says M-A-C-K-Intosh. MC in the traditional way, Macintosh, like the famous audiophile audio stereo company, to whom I think we paid a sum so that they would not sue us, and we used some variation of Macintosh as our product name. But as you know, we ultimately chose M-A-C, Macintosh. And thus, the Macintosh got its name. Okay. You ready? Well then, bring on the panel. This next panel is the people who actually, during the period that we were creating the Macintosh, created it. We have Bill Atkinson, who you saw, who wrote the fundamental graphics routines that made it possible for things to be displayed. We have Caroline Rose, who is able to write for programmers in a way that humans can understand. We have Andy Hertzfeld, who, if there is a sparkle in the eye of the Macintosh, Bruce Horn, the father of the Finder, and his assistant. And also the inventor of the resource fork, who had the idea of let's take all of the shareable things like fonts and snippets of text and images and put them in a place where they could be easily shared. George Crow, who made one board that contained both television set and power supply. Made it small and light and inexpensive, functional, long-lived, and cool. I mean, temperature-wise cool. Randy Wigington, as you know, wrote our first word processor, one of the key products. Bill Atkinson, I already said, wrote the graphics that made everything run, and he said, I want to do a product. And so he made his code visible by creating Mac Paint. And, of course, Stephen Levy, who wrote about all that for years and years and years. Thank you for being our moderator, and off you go.
Thank you. So the 30th anniversary of Macintosh is special for all of us, but it has a real personal meaning for me. In 1983, the eve of Macintosh, I've been starting to cover computers. I started life as a rock critic. Then I realized, as I covered it more, that this was the new rock and roll, amplified there. I was working for Rolling Stone at the time and convinced them to give me an assignment to write about this new computer that Apple was doing. There was a lot of excitement in the Valley, but in New York City, people didn't get much of a thrill. They didn't think very much of it or think very much about computers in general. I thought Apple would be thrilled that I was going to write about their computer there. What better publicity than being Rolling Stone, right? But when I pitched it, I got sort of a tepid response. And then finally, they got back to me and said, I think it was Jane Anderson who's in the audience here, do you think that we could get on the cover? Because Steve Jobs says he doesn't want to be in Rolling Stone unless he's on the cover. But I think some of the people here maybe got wind that Rolling Stone wanted to do a story and maybe convinced Steve that it should be otherwise, and I went in there. But even so, I remember the first day was one of the greatest days of my reporting life. First I met the computer, it was going to change all our lives, and mine too. I vowed that instant I saw it, I've got to get one. Then I met these people here. Some of them, since I've been my close friends ever since. I remember very in particular, Bill and Andy. I met them together. They came popping out of a cubicle, and Bill said, "Hey, do you want to see a bug?" And he turned on the Macintosh, and there was this picture of an insect. And so it was thrilling to talk to these people. And of course, at the end of the day, I met Steve, who immediately started in saying, "Why aren't we on the cover of Rolling Stone?" I called Jan Wenner today. We're not on, I said, "What did he say?" He said, well, he blew me off. He said, "Don't hold your breath." And, and he kept railing about it and telling me how crappy Rolling Stone was. And he just read the story in Rolling Stone about MTV. It was a piece of shit. And I said, well, I wrote that story. And this is pure Steve. He changed the subject. It was like I didn't say it. Yeah. And I thought about it years later when Steve died, that the pictures that were taken for that story, that Rolling Stone story, those great pictures by Norman Seeff, included some beautiful portraits of Steve that were on the covers of many magazines, including Rolling Stone at that time. But anyway, first I want to have this spectacular panel, have each person talk about how he or she wound up on the Mac team. Bill gave a little flavor of what they did, and maybe talked about, in a little more detail of their contribution there. Carolyn?
Well, in 1982, I was working at Timeshare, a half a block away from where the Macintosh work was being done, in an area that, when I first started working at Timeshare, was an apricot orchard. And Timeshare had acquired Doug Engelbart's group from SRI, so I had some experience using a very complicated mouse. And that was back, by the way, when clicking was called bugging, bug rather than click. So I go way back. And I thought it was kind of cumbersome, and it got my attention somewhat, but I was a die-hard Timeshare employee. I was going to stay there forever. And actually, a friend that I was starting to tell this story to said I should explain, for those who may not know in the audience, that this meant that I was using a mainframe computer and dialing up through a modem. That's what time sharing was. So I had also, through a friend, used the Alto computer. I had played Hangman on it, so I wasn't taking that very seriously either. I wasn't really seeing the big picture of what was going on in the world at that time. Hence my thinking I would be at Timeshare forever. Some people had already left Timeshare to go to Apple, and one of them was there when Steve Jobs said he wanted a basically he put out an all-points bulletin for technical writing about some programming experience, and I had started timeshare as a writer, but then I thought I wanted to be a programmer, so I switched to that, and I did that for about 6 years, and then I decided I liked writing better. So I fit the bill, and I had to be called and asked to go to Apple. Because all I knew was it was a company that had been named after a fruit, and I wasn't even taking it very seriously. But after the interview, and especially after I told a friend what I had seen at the interview, which I guess I wasn't under non-disclosure, as I told a friend when I got back that I had seen these balls bouncing all over the screen, and he grabbed me into a conference room and said, "Oh my God, you're allowed to tell me that?" And I got really excited then, and was excited about it from then on, just meeting the team and seeing how happy everyone was to be there and how enthusiastic they were. It spread to me pretty quickly, but I did have to be kind of dragged into it at first. So I started in June of '82. And wrote inside Macintosh, I guess I should have said. I did not help, but that was my baby.
I'm Andy Hertzfeld. I became involved with, I met Earl Smith the end of my first week at Apple. He was an extraordinary character. I became good friends with him. And when he asked me for some help with his prototype, when he got the very first 6809 based Macintosh going, he didn't know if the screen was working or not, and he needed some test software for that. I cooked up some test software. That was when my job was working on the Apple II. I just was helping them on the side, but I coveted working on the Macintosh. And one famous day in Apple's history, February 26, 1981, Mike Scott, the CEO at the time, decided to fire all the engineering managers in the Apple II group simultaneously, as well as quite a few engineers. And I used the ensuing chaos as an opportunity to, well, since my manager was gone, I could do whatever I wanted. I asked Mike Scott, hey, can I work on the Macintosh? And that caught Steve Jobs' attention, and he came over, and there's a well-known story about how he said, well, you're on the Mac team now. And I said, give me a few days to finish up this Apple II stuff I'm doing. He goes, no, what's more important than the Macintosh? The Apple II is going to be dead in a few years. And he took my Apple II, unplugged it, making me lose all the code I was working on, and started carrying it off. What could I do but follow him?
I'm Bruce Horn. I was working at Xerox PARC kind of as a child, Actually, I'd written a letter to Hewlett Packard when I was 12 saying I wanted to work there. And HP wrote me a really nice letter back and said, well, call us back when you're 18, we'll give you a job. And Ted Kaler had come down to junior high school and said, hey, need some kids to do some programming. So I jumped at that, and apparently, Xerox had no problem with child labor, and so I working there for quite some time, starting at about 1973. So I was there when Steve came in and saw the Smalltalk demo, and then I talked to Larry. I was talking to Larry Tesler after I was finishing school, thinking it was time to move on. I'd been at PARC for a long time, and Larry said, yeah, we're doing some great stuff at Apple. And I said, okay, well, check it out. So I came and saw the Lisa and talked to a lot of the people. And at one point, Larry kind of figured, maybe Bruce would be happier in the Mac group. So I went over to the Mac group and I talked to Andy and talked to Steve, of course, and saw this little machine. And actually, when I saw it, Andy gave me this great demo, and I thought, God, you guys are done. And there's nothing for me to do, right? Anyway, it was a really great demo. So I went back and I thought about it, and I decided to go to VLSI Technology, where one of the people that I've been working with at Xerox PARC had started this great little company, Doug Fairbairn. So Steve calls me on a Friday night and says, so what do you think of Apple? And I said, well, Steve, it's really, really cool, but I'm going to go work at VLSI Technology. And he said, you're doing what? Get in here tomorrow. You know, we're not done with you. You come in tomorrow morning at 8 o'clock. We have lots more stuff to show you. So you know, he kind of went on, and I kind of felt like this on the phone. And so I went in the next morning, and he took me around, and Andy was there, and everybody was there, and I was looking at all these amazing things, and he was showing me the logic board and how wonderful and small it was, and how it had fewer chips on the logic board than the IBM PC video board, and very proud of all the stuff that's going on there. And so by the end of the weekend, I changed my mind. I had to call up Doug and tell him I was going to go to Apple. But I have a little bit more of the story. So I show up at Apple, and no computer. And so I'm sitting there, I'm kind of wandering around, and being kind of a kid, I go, I'm sorry, the plane, you know, no computer, nothing I can do with that. You know, I can't really work without a computer. So I tell Andy, you know, it's kind of, what kind of place is this where I don't have a computer if I'm supposed to be programming? So Andy tells Steve, and Steve takes Andy for a walk around the parking lot and says, should we fire Bruce? I've been there 3 days, right? So Andy says, no, don't fire Bruce, just get him a computer. So I get a little note, it says, go to this room in this other building and just take the computer off the desk. So I go to this other building, and I go to the room, and the name on the office was John Couch. He was the head of the office. And it turned out that John was on vacation or something. So John Couch knew that he wouldn't be there, so I just took his computer off the desk, and that's what I used to develop. That was how I started.
Like Bruce, I was working at Xerox, and in 1976 I discovered an Alto in a closet that nobody was using. And if you don't know an Alto, it had a full-page display. And then, just about the time Owen Densmore came out and talked to Larry and found out that Larry had disappeared from Park and was working at Apple, we had just taken delivery of Dandelions, which were these things that had 2-page displays. And it was really kind of a really cool computer for that time. And so I flew out to Apple because Owen said, nobody here knows how to do any printing at all. And at Xerox, of course, we knew how to do printing. So anyway, I flew out, and they showed me the lease, and the first thing I said is, geez, that screen is incredibly small. How can you use such a small screen? And then, anyway, blah, 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 wrote a laser driver, blah, 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 wrote a game called Alice, and Steve liked it and hauled me over, and I got to go in the secret Texaco Tower things because I was going to be given a Mac. I was one of the first people outside of the Mac group to get a Mac. And Andy shows me this thing, and I go, Jesus, that screen is small. There's not enough pixels to do anything there. But over time, you know, I got used to that small, cute size. And I guess the rest is pixel history.
Well, I'm George Crow, and when I first met Steve Jobs, actually I was working at Hewlett Packard, and Steve and Rod came to see me, and they were telling me about this fantastic thing they were doing at Apple. And I was perfectly happy at Hewlett Packard, so I had my doubts. And at the time I was working on a 68,000 base computer that was going to, we hoped, sell for $10,000. And I thought that was pretty hot stuff. So they invited me over to Apple to see the prototype of the Macintosh, and they told me what it was going to sell for, which at the time was actually quite a bit less than what it actually sold for. But I was just blown away. And that's when I made up my mind to go to Apple. There was one other minor issue, though, and that's that Steve had turned his reality distortion field on me full strength, and he was telling me how Apple stock was going to go straight to the moon. It wasn't going to take any pauses. It was just going to take off. And I had an interview with Mike Marquardt after Steve, and I said, you know, Mike, this sounds awfully, optimistic to me. What do you think? And he said, yeah, no, it's not going to go straight up. It's going to go through normal stock cycles. And I realized that there was some reality at the company, and I was sold. So.
What is Apple stock now?
So my name is Randy Wigginton, and I feel like I'm listening to a bunch of lies because according to the Ashton Kutcher documentary, I was on the Apple III for a long time, and we all know how that went. I went over to Lisa for a short time, and then Steve came in to, as he said, rescue me. And he proceeded to tell me about the qualities of everyone else at the company. I won't share that with everybody, but you can just guess. And I mean, I met everybody. Once I met Andy, I'd worked with Andy before on the Apple II, but I mean, it was a great team to work with. I was just immediately sold.
How did you wind up doing Mac Right? What led to you actually doing the application?
There were several other people that were supposed to do the word processor first, and they kept giving time estimates that it would take them like 4 or 5 years. And Steve talked to me, and of course I believe everything to be done in a few months. I was a little off.
How long did it take you?
2.5 years.
Better than 5. Mr. Atkinson?
Hi, my name's Bill Atkinson. I was studying neuroscience, working on my PhD up at the University of Washington in Seattle. I wanted to be a scientist to study how does the mind work, how does the brain work. And I got this call from my friend Jeff Raskin that I'd known from my undergraduate school at UC San Diego. And he said, there's this really cool thing starting up in, I didn't think it was even called Silicon Valley at that point, this great company, you've got to come and check it out. And I said, no, I got to finish my degree. Well, Jeff didn't take no. He sent me round-trip airfare. He said, just come and visit for a weekend, no strings attached. And I came down, and Steve Jobs spent the whole day with me, recruiting me. And he introduced me to, at that time there were about 30 people at Apple, and I got to meet them all, and they seemed very intelligent, passionate, and like they were having a fun time. And but at the end of the day, what Steve said is, you know, up in Seattle, you read about some hot new technology. Well, that really was made 2 years ago. If you want to affect the world, you have to be ahead of that lag time. So come down to Silicon Valley, where we're inventing the future, and you can have an impact. And he left me with a visual. He said, you know, think how fun it is to surf on the front edge of a wave. And how not fun to dog paddle on the same wave, on the tail end. And that kind of stuck in my mind. And 4 days later, I was working at Apple. I never finished my PhD. So first I worked on Apple II, and I remember Jeff Raskin, who was a total punster, at one point said, well, we got to a production line of 100 Apple IIs in a day. He said that was a pretty hot Apple turnover. I worked on the UCSD Pascal system for the Apple II, and
now this is a crowd. Where else could you get applause?
And when I was coming off of that, Steve asked me to work on the Lisa project. And I got assurances that the UCSD Pascal system wouldn't be abandoned, and indeed they put Al Hoffman on, who did a great job of carrying it forward. I got to work on the graphics for Lisa, which at that time was envisioned to be a bit slice processor. Thank God for Rich Page. You know, he at some point said, "This is nuts. The 68,000 is going to come out." Motorola was lucky and got good silicon the first run, and the rest is history. I wrote the graphics primitives, and in writing them, thanks. They were originally called, I think, Lisa Graph. And then we realized they were later going to be used for this Macintosh thing, so we better not call them that, so we changed it to Quick Draw. Graphics primitives, I needed to test them. And so I made a little Max Sketch program that just, you know, we would draw ovals and lines and text and everything that Quick Draw could do. It was sort of an exercising program. And then when Steve took the Macintosh project away from Jeff Raskin, Jeff wanted to make an information appliance. Like a toaster, you buy it, it does what it does, it's never going to do anything else. And Steve saw the Lisa and said, we want to make like a folks Lisa. We want to make a platform that people can write software to. And that's the gist of why he took it away from Jeff. And it wouldn't have been the same thing at all. So then I became an honorary member, first honorary member of the Macintosh team. I was sort of in the Lisa team and also in the Mac team because my QuickDraw code was in the Mac. And then I got to write a painting program, which sort of started with my testing program and became MacPaint. And I used Susan Kerr as one of my guinea pigs. I think I learned a lot about how to make a usable program from watching Susan Kerr draw things with this, my prototype of MacPaint. And so that's how I got on the team. I was first on the Lisa team, and then I moved over to the Mac team, I don't know, about 83. Beginning of 83.
Did your son say anything? I thought you were chiming in. Well, let me ask something. This is now famous that Steve, said, well, it's better to be a pirate than join the Navy, right? And you have this flag up there. What was that all about? I mean, did that was something that galvanized you? Did you need that? What did it mean? Was it a diss for the rest of the company? What do you remember about the pirate issue there?
Caps.
This is Caps.
Okay. But to me, the Mac team was this small little team with a great spirit, but then we went into a phase of growing pretty fast. And it was clear, at least to the original people, that it wasn't so freewheeling. And, once it got up to about 40 people or so, it had to get an organization. And I think Steve was trying to appeal to the original people's sentiments when he said that. It was kind of wishful thinking.
Steve, did you?
I can tell the story of the flag. It's kind of funny. Susan and I conspired to do it in a role reversal. I sewed it and she painted it. And we reconvened a Sunday night and put it up. And I'm actually a pretty handy guy, but my brain was, fried from staying up all night. I didn't come with any tools. So we get to the building, we get up on the roof, and the guard comes out and looks at us and basically does a Sergeant Schultz. I don't know what you guys are doing. We're trying to drape it, kind of like a 4th of July thing, over the roof, and it was really it wasn't capturing the spirit. And the building had not been done, it was just being finished up. So I said, wait, we can go steal a part off one of the scaffold. So I go back downstairs, and one of the diagonals, I break the pipe off, and I'm sitting there saying, I hope it's not going to collapse tomorrow. And again, a couple miles away in my house is a full box of tools, nails, screws, anything I would ever want. I don't think to drive home and get it. I find 4 rusty nails on the roof, and we have a pair of pliers. So we're nailing this pipe, and basically one nail to hold the thing through the hole in the bottom, and a couple of nails bent over it, and if a big gust came, it would have lost it. And we hung the flag up, and we just went home. But the best thing about it, the next day, and I'll probably tear up here, the next day there was a little bit of a breeze, and it wasn't enough to knock it over, but the flag was fluttering. And you couldn't really tell it was a piece of the scaffold, so I didn't think the workmen would come after us. But it was fun, and the guard I don't think he got fired.
So, as we learned, the Macintosh project, as it took years, right? And people think of technology now moving very, very quickly, and it's actually, I guess almost a transitional period of the times that computers would take many, many years to something much shorter there. I want you to talk a bit about what deadline pressure there was, maybe the stages where you felt that you were going to ship it, and when did it become mandatory to ship it by January 1984?
Well, a project as complex as the Mac, there's many deadlines and stages. The very first one was the hard tool. To stamp out the cases of the Macintosh, it takes like a year to just build the metal thing that can withstand, you know, the pressures. So that was in February '82. That was when the very first piece of the Macintosh was finished.
Was the form factor done? So I know that they were like, you know, they were testing different shapes and things like that. There was the Cuisinart period or something like that.
Oh no, yeah, there was a period. That was after almost a whole year of iteration and a whole series of models. I'm sure Jerry could answer that better than me, but there were at least four models. But anyway, after that, there was you know, the hardware board had to you know, get committed way before anything else, and the hardware design kept changing. And then the biggest deadline to me was in September of, maybe August of 1983, which was the ROM. And I remember staying up all night, and it was pretty exhausting. The ROM code was particularly scary because you couldn't change it. We knew there would be bugs, yet we're like kind of casting it in concrete there. But then, of course, the one all of us remember the most was getting the right paint disc off at the end. The only reason I was able to stay awake was Randy Wigington brought in a bunch of chocolate-covered espresso beans. Eating about, you know, 300 of them.
Steve?
There's actually a story where one Saturday we had all been up all night, and Steve was on a press tour in the East Coast, and we discussed not shipping the final disc, that there was only going to be 2 machines per dealer, and they were going to sell one and keep one behind. And we had gone through the math of how it would be much cheaper and much more sane for us to just FedEx these discs a week or 2 later. And we had convinced everybody locally in the room that this was the pragmatic thing, sane thing to do. And Steve, somehow through the speakerphone, got into our brains and convinced us that we were all really stupid. And he was right. And we went back. I can remember us all just feeling like we had just been, you know, thrown over the cliff, because we had been. And we went back, and I remember us trudging back in the room and working. And later on, he said something that was very wise. He says, if I had taken off the pressure, you guys would have just fallen apart. And it would have taken you months to recover. And he's actually right, because once we did ship the Mac in January, it took us, we thought it was going to take us a few weeks to do the next rev, but it took us till May or June. So he was wise about that, as much as we hated him for it at the time.
And describe how much you worked that week. What was that last sprint like?
Oh, Bruce and I, everybody, but Bruce and I, just because we had a little bit of extra pressure.
Well, when I remember visiting you guys in the Finder Ghetto, as you called it, you folks were pretty crazed.
It was pretty bad.
Because you were trying to fix those bugs in the ROM.
At the same time, they're doing all this press at the same time, so it was like a zoo.
Well, I want to say, you know, Caps and I working away, you know, in our little room by ourselves. You know, Steve was keeping the pressure on. You know, Jobs was, of course, but something to remember is that it is very hard, as Larry said, to make something small. And so we had very, very limited space on this machine. And actually, you know, this is something that I've never seen since, but, you know, people like Caps and Andy could make things amazingly small with amazing functionality, and we were squishing everything in. But I do remember we made the Finder a tiny bit bigger, and it took like another 60 bytes, and then Bill came screaming at us because he took 60 bytes out of RAM that was made a Mac Paint crash. And so, I mean, we're talking 60 bytes. You can barely have a password of 60 bytes. So we had to work around that, but it was a ton of work, but it was a lot of fun. It's a craft type of thing, and everybody that I work with were craftsmen. Craftspeople. It's really fun.
And then the right paint disc had to be done at 6 a.m. When we were there all weekend making releases, like about every hour and a half. We'd cut a new release and everyone would go test it. And at about 3 a.m. or maybe 2 a.m. we made a release and nothing worked. I mean, it was so bad. But just somehow, at 5:30 a.m., we cut a release, and it wasn't so bad. I won't say it was great.
Actually, it was 5:54 a.m.
Yeah.
We had 6 minutes of testing.
I actually remember a time when Andy was testing, and for some reason he was in somebody else's queue, and something went wrong, and he looks up to say, "Did anybody see this?" Because he wasn't going to say.
I pretended I didn't see it.
And I'm saying, "Come on, Andy, we can fix this."
Carolyn, how did you keep up with all this? The right inside Mac, all the changes.
Well, it was especially hard because I wasn't working 90 hours a week. Because in order for me to have the kind of concentration that I needed while I was on the job, I needed to kind of go home at a decent hour and have.
So you didn't get the T-shirt that said 90 hours a week in London?
I never did like that T-shirt. I felt so guilty to tell you the truth. Like 90? They're working 90? I'm only working 60, but at most. No, it was very hard. In fact, Steve was upset that it wasn't done right at SHIP, but it couldn't have been anyway because things were changing so rapidly, and the Insight Macintosh staff was. The people working on it with me was not that many people, and so in order to keep up with it, well, it just couldn't have been done in time. But fortunately, we had the brains of people who make these decisions were smart enough to put it out in preliminary form so that everybody, all the developers, knew everything we knew up to the minute. So the pressure was off me and us from that perspective.
Now, one thing that struck me when I first saw the machine was the first machine I saw with those little mini floppies, the Sony mini floppies. And I came to understand there was a story about that. George,
Sure.
Was that Steve's original choice?
Yeah, the floppy story actually is, the part you're talking about is pretty funny, but the situation surrounding the disk was actually a very, very serious problem that threatened the project. What had happened was Apple was developing a disk drive called Twiggy that was a double-sided 5¼ inch disk drive, and it had considerably more capacity than any of the 3½ inch drives did at the time. They were only 256 kilobytes. Twiggy failed, and we realized we were going to have to go find another drive. And the real challenge that we had, that really hit the software group, was that their software wouldn't fit on a 256 gig drive. They were counting on having the double-sided Twiggy. So there were basically two ways to go. Apple had traditionally worked with Alps, who did the 5¼ inch disk drive that Apple shipped in all the Apple IIs, and felt very comfortable with them. And I know Steve and Rod both were very close to Alps and were very much in favor of using them. Steve had a bad meeting with Sony and was, for various reasons, very down on Sony and said no way that we should use Sony. And in fact, one of his techniques to try to get us to focus would would make these edicts. And in this case, he said anybody working on the Sony disk drive was going to be fired. Well, I talked that over with Burl, and Burl actually was the one who encouraged me to go ahead and do it, because we both realized...
Was he fired, or what?
What's that? Yeah, that's right, they want to get rid of me. But anyway, we realized that Sony actually had a product. They were, at that point, they'd already sold it to Hewlett-Packard. So we knew it existed, whereas Alps was just giving us promises to develop the product. And we felt, this was in 1983, and we just didn't have time to risk it. So I started working closely with Sony. Burl taught me, the problem with the Sony was it was 256 kilobytes. We had to figure out a way to increase that, and the way we decided to do it was by making this variable speed. And by doing that, we could keep constant bit density on the disk, and we were able to increase it to 400 kilobytes, which was just enough, as long as the software guys were able to compress things. In order to do that, we had to go to a motor controller, and we also had to translate from the format they used was the standard PC format called MFM, and of course we had the WAS format. Burl taught me how to work with PALs, they're programmable logic devices, and we were able to use those to convert from what was going on the MacBoard to what was going on the disk drive. We required Sony's cooperation to modify their design, and I was working closely with a project team headed by a guy named Hidetoshi Komodo. He and I are friends to this day, and we really had a great working relationship. But the problem is he worked for Sony. And one day, we were working in the lab testing his most recent disk drive that he had just brought from Japan. And we got word that Steve was going to be visiting the lab any minute. So, so I hustled Hidetoshi Komodo into the broom closet. And he hid in there until Steve had come and gone. And I have to say, honestly, looking back, I don't believe for a minute that Steve didn't know what we were doing, but we just couldn't really let him catch us.
You know, someone mentioned earlier Microsoft there. Now, I'm kind of curious. You know, some of you had some contact with Microsoft. What was that like with Microsoft doing some of the application software? I know to this day, Bill Gates will always say that he's more of a member of the Macintosh team than the Macintosh team. He said we have more people working on software at Microsoft than Apple did for the Mac. And, you know, what was that like? Did any of you know, have interactions with the folks in Seattle?
Well, if they had more people than us, then it doesn't speak very highly of the quality of the people they have.
The thing you have to remember is Microsoft wasn't what they became at that time. They were a small private company. Apple had probably 20x the revenues of Microsoft when they started doing that. You know, they were our close collaborators. They were the first company we gave a Mac to. I don't know if you guys remember, but that day that they came down and they took away 3 Macs with them. And I felt like our little baby was leaving home for the first time. But then, especially a fellow there named Neil Conson, who was their kind of systems guy, used to call me at least once a week. And they really helped us shake out, you know, we were writing user interface framework, but we didn't have enough applications. We really only had Mac Paint and Mac Write. So then they were doing 3 applications themselves. So they really helped shake things out. But I also, Neil would often ask, he was fascinated by the region data structure in QuickTrade. He was asking me all these questions. So why do you have to know the internals of regions? You know, you're just using them. And I quickly caught on, well, maybe they were trying to copy the Mac at the time. And sure enough, in November 1983, they announced Windows. And we were kind of shocked by that.
Anytime Mac sure helped.
Actually, I have one little story there since I actually did used to work for Microsoft. I was amazed that well into 2000, we'd be at a project review and Gates would say, what would Apple do? That it was still such a big influence on him. And this was after he was the world's richest guy, and Microsoft was obviously at that point a lot more successful than Apple was. But it still burned into his you know, his sense of what a good product was. That you guys can't come up with it, so tell me what Apple would have done.
I think it's really interesting how it's still that way. I mean, everybody looks at Apple and says, what's Apple going to do? Everybody's copying Apple. And so something that Steve did and all the people who he hired kind of made Apple have a particular way of thinking and a particular kind of passion for the user and the product that is here today, 30 years later. So I think that's a
It wasn't work. We were making art. Steve insisted that we sign all sign our names on a piece of paper with a Sharpie, and then he put it on, engraved it into the mold so that all our signatures would be on it. And the reason is, he said, you know, real artists sign their work and they're proud of it. We want you to be proud of this and sign your name to it and say, yes, this is the art that I've made.
But Apple from the very start was passionate.
Yeah, Apple II.
The Apple II, the disk drive, I mean, all of it was always just driven by passion. It was never, you know, we could have made a look-alike PC and been very successful, but we would never consider that.
It was so different, you know, and obviously so much easier to use. But how did you test it? How did you know that people were going to figure it out and things like that? You come with that.
On the Lisa team, Larry Tesler did something very smart. He set up a room with a half-silvered mirror and a test subject. Usually there were spouses who were sort of under non-disclosure, but they weren't computer savvy at all. And we had a video camera pointing down at the keyboard and the mouse and another one at the screen with their face reflected in it. We would give them a task and we would ask them to keep a stream of consciousness going. Always mutter under your breath what you're doing. And so we'd go through tests. Somebody would start them off and give them a task, and then we'd abandon them and kind of see, where they went. And at one point, this person was supposed to save a document they'd been editing, and they got to this dialogue that said, they gave me two choices. It said, do it, and the other one said, cancel. We kind of miffed, and he hit cancel. And next week, a different person had that same kind of expression. And we turned up the volume on the tape recordings, and the guy was saying, what's this dolt? I don't know dolt, so he cancels. So do it, in a sans serif font, looked like dolt to them. Now, this is an important point. The important point is that software designers have a blind spot. Whatever they know, whatever their dogma is, whatever they know already creates a blind spot that anybody else could see right away, but they can't. We knew it said do it, so nobody on the team could possibly read that as dolt. And so I think also, this brings up the, in software design, to make really great software, you need to test on lots of real users, and it's actually more about engineering than it is about art. You may have a cool idea, but if you try it on people and they get confused and they feel stupid, bag it, find a different way, fix it. I think the Lisa and Mac user interface got debugged into existence thousands and thousands of individual mistakes at a time. We would do fix one and okay, then the next day was okay and cancel and that problem went away. But then we worked on the next one. Well, how do you know which way the scroll arrow should go? Now everything, and how many buttons should the mouse have? Everything was done empirically. Everything was done by real people trying to use it. We were trying to make something that was user-friendly. And what that meant is somebody could walk up to it and figure out how to use it without reading a manual. And
why do you have cursor keys? Where were the cursor keys?
There were cursor keys.
Yeah, dedicated cursor keys on the original?
Yeah, not on the original.
No, there wasn't.
Steve, we should have put the cursor keys probably, but Steve was afraid, the mouse was so new that he was afraid that if we put the cursor keys on, the developers wouldn't use the mouse. So the original Mac, they added the cursor keys back when Steve was gone.
And if changed.
IBM actually took Apple, it advertised, want to do real work, want to do games, get a mouse. Want to do real work, get a keyboard.
There's actually a story that ties this together. It's funny. There was a user test many years later, which was testing the Mac 2 out-of-box experience, which, if you recall, was absolutely horrendous, and sometimes involved blood as the people cut themselves and opened them up. But there was this one video we watched where this guy gets the Mac 2 out, sets it up, plugs in the mouse, and one of the rules with user testing is you're not supposed to interfere. And so this guy plugs in the mouse, and he never seen a mouse before, so he let the cord go towards him. And so then they have him run through a cycle of tests, and he's sitting there, and if you think about it, if you have a mouse upside down, when you go up, it goes down. When you go right, it goes left. So the guy actually got through the test, and so at the end, you usually interview him and say, hey, what'd you think? And he goes, I got a suggestion for you. Why don't you make it when you go up?
That's great. We heard a lot about, making a dent in the universe. When you were working on this thing, did you have a sense of how much of a dent you were going to make on the universe, or?
Yeah.
Sounds, I don't know that we envisioned it being here 30 years later, but yeah.
But Steve would constantly drum into us how much of a debt was going to be. So of course, we believed him, more or less.
But in the summer of '84, the dent seemed a little shallow.
Yeah.
The question is, would Jerome's times the clock work 30 years later? Didn't it max out at 2019 or something?
2030? No, I forget. Yeah.
Pretty funny. Neil. So I remember around the time I was doing the story, there was a lot of controversy about what the price was going to be. Did you guys have your own ideas?
$9.95.
Yeah.
That's what the originally supposed to be.
The price constantly escalated. Jeff Raskin's initial price was $500, but when he did a little bit of analysis, he realized it had to cost $1,000. So the Jeff Macintosh was $1,000. As soon as we went to the $68,000, that was a pretty expensive part. That kicked it up to $14.95, and that was our price for years and years and years. But then when George talked about the Twiggy failing, and we had to go with the Sony at the last minute, and so that we had to, even though we hated it, we realized we'd have to sell it for $19.95. But then the horrible part of it was John Scully, who's in the audience today, convinced Steve that we have to charge $24.95 for it to pay for a big marketing campaign for it. That kind of broke my heart, because the difference between that really was the difference of a kid being able to get their hands on one or not. Between $1,500 and $2,500. And so I wish it was $19.95. Yeah, now it's amazing what you get now.
It's amazing.
I remember the meeting when that price was announced. It was such a sad day. There were practically tears in our eyes. Very few things do I remember as clearly as that meeting, when we were just all really depressed.
Because we all thought we were making something for ourselves and the people we cared about. And that price, once it got up above $2,000 much, it no longer could be that.
Well, we thought of it all along as the appliance, or is comparable to a toaster or a Cuisinart, whatever. Everyone can just buy one, and not at that price. We knew that. It was very sad.
No, we've heard a lot about, we've talked a lot about Steve Jobs here, and we heard a lot about his management style, things like that. How tough, looking back, how tough was he on you, and was what mitigated that? Because obviously you all seem to have felt it was worth it in spades, right? So talk about that issue about his style. It was going to be harsh. I remember you guys told me about it when I first talked to you. That was before the days where you would have a PR person sitting in all the interviews. I remember you'd never see that now, but I met Andy and Bill. So why don't you go out to lunch with Stephen? And there was no one listening in, and I got the unvarnished side of the whole thing. As a matter of fact, one of you even said, "You got to talk to Jeff Raskin. He's got a story to tell." Which I was all fortified with by the time I talked to Steve. But talk about that style.
I think Bill had the evolution of an idea with Steve's story. If you remember, I'm putting you on the spot here.
Rex?
What? No, just the first day. That sucks. What do you think you're doing? The second day, oh, that really is terrible. And then the third day, hey Bill, look what I thought of. and Bill, I hope I'm not putting words in your mouth, but you helped me get through some difficult times at points with this, because in Bill's eyes, what he was doing was telling you to go back and work harder on it. Yeah. That he saw that it was a good idea, but he knew if you just ground it down a few days, that you'd come up with an even better idea a few days later.
Over and over he did that. Now Steve wasn't really an engineer, but he knew how to get the best out of people. Like, I know one time he came to Larry Kenyon, who was working on the operating system, and he said, we gotta make this thing go faster. It takes too long to start up. And he said, now Larry, if if it would save a person's life, could you make it 10 seconds faster? And Larry said, yeah, probably I could. He said, okay. And he took a whiteboard and he started multiplying out. He says, well, I know we're going to sell at least 1 million of these, but maybe a lot more. But if you multiply turning it on each day times 1 million people, very quickly it comes out to many people's lifetimes if you would save 10 seconds. And I think a few days later, Larry came in and he had it was maybe like 30 seconds faster. So it's an example that Steve didn't know how to make it faster, but he knew how to light up a fire under somebody to make them motivated to do it better.
Well, I want to thank you all. It's been terrific. And you guys for the MAC and for who you are. Thanks very much.
Okay, there we are. I have employee number 4. I would like to invite employee number 3 to join me on the stage.
Just like
Chris Espinosa.
It's really a great honor and a super pleasure to be able to be here and participate in this celebration of the job that all of you guys did, and the other 110 that are out in the audience and are going to be up here in a minute, with the MAC 30 years ago. It's just cotton picking, unbelievable. You're all heroes. And you did change the world. There is no two ways about it, no doubt about it. The world's a different place today. With the magic of the Mac user interface and what we didn't understand, the internet waiting in the wings, waiting for enough personal computers to be installed so that it could start to grow at tremendous speeds. You've changed the world. It's wonderful that you did. So this evening is all about the MAC team, and it's to congratulate you on the job that you did to create the MAC, and to thank you for that job as well. And most important to me, it's just thanks for the MAC. I use mine every day. I did talk to Bill before coming out here, and I said, well, what are you guys going to get for this? Are you going to get a plaque or a picture, or what are they going to get? And he says, oh, it's all taken care of. So I have no idea if it's going to be anything, but certainly this evening has been wonderful. And can we just give the two panels one more round of applause? Bill, and there's going to be a lot of chaos in here while we get the other 110 folks up so that we can take the largest picture in existence of the MAC team. So Bill, it's all yours.
Would you join me over here?
Sure.
Over here. See, I get to boss him around. Well, I have a thing. It is the MAC being uplifted by 6 arms on a granite plaque. And we wanted to give some kind of commemorative item to everyone, but logistically that was impossible. So we distilled all of our love and care into this one object with a little plaque that says, Apple and Macintosh would never have happened without you. Your participation has changed the world. And symbolically, for everyone, we would like to give this one object to Mike Markelen. Your name,
Thank you. That's just wonderful. Thank you very much.
Now, logistics is moving things around productively in some efficient way. And we're going to do some logistics. First, all of you step forward here in front of the tables, please. And Eric will come out and he'll take your microphones away from you, but please stay on the stage. While you're doing that, stagehands will be taking the chairs and the tables away from you, okay? Away from behind you. Why we're doing this is because we're going to get the rest of the MAC team up here in just a moment for a team photo. So there are various things that can happen. Press photographers and videographers can come down in front of the first row. Anyone from the audience who wants to take pictures of the team as they're being assembled can come into row B, the second row. Anybody who doesn't want to do that can start your intermission right now and go to a pre-intermission. As soon as the photographer is out here and set up, I'm going to ask all of you MAC people who have been supposedly given little passes. Were the original 125 members given little passes? Okay, so all of you people with the photo passes, then you can come in on either side and make your way in here after I call you up. Okay, we need to get the photographer settled and nailed down first.